Sometimes the smallest pair of hands reveals the biggest truth. Ethan Caldwell had built his reputation by noticing details other people ignored. A misplaced signature in a billion-dollar contract, a hesitation during a negotiation, a single sentence that revealed more than an entire presentation ever could. Those instincts had transformed him into one of the youngest self-made billionaires in America, yet on the evening that should have celebrated the happiest chapter of his life, it was not a business deal that stopped him in his tracks. It was a little boy holding a worn scrub brush. The Caldwell mansion glowed beneath thousands of warm lights as luxury sedans lined the circular driveway and elegantly dressed guests filled the grand entrance with polished laughter. Crystal chandeliers reflected across imported marble floors while a string quartet performed familiar classics that drifted effortlessly through the enormous foyer. Every arrangement had been perfected for the private engagement celebration of Ethan Caldwell and Victoria Hale, the woman every society magazine described as graceful, sophisticated, and destined to stand beside one of America's wealthiest entrepreneurs. Staff members moved quietly through the mansion carrying silver trays and fresh flowers, careful never to interrupt conversations between executives, philanthropists, and influential families who had gathered beneath the enormous vaulted ceiling. Among those employees was Sarah Miller, dressed in a neatly pressed black maid's uniform with a crisp white apron tied carefully around her waist. She worked with calm precision, adjusting place settings, polishing crystal glasses, and making certain every guest felt welcome without ever drawing attention to herself. She had learned long ago that the best housekeepers became almost invisible inside homes that belonged to other people. Tonight she hoped for nothing more than finishing her shift, collecting Liam, and returning to their small apartment before midnight. 4-year-old Liam waited quietly in a service hallway with a coloring book and a tiny wooden toy truck that had once belonged to Sarah's late father. Mrs. Whitmore, the longtime housekeeper who managed the mansion staff, checked on him whenever she could, offering cookies and warm smiles between responsibilities. Everyone who worked inside the mansion knew Liam was unusually polite, always thanking adults and never wondering where he wasn't supposed to go. Sarah reminded him every morning that kindness cost nothing, even when life felt expensive. Across the ballroom, Victoria Hale admired the final preparations with a satisfied smile. Every flower, every candle, every polished surface reflected the perfection she demanded. As guests complimented the elegance of the evening, she accepted every word as though flawless celebrations happened naturally around her. Then her eye settled on Sarah, who quietly adjusted a chair that had shifted slightly away from the dining table. Victoria's pleasant expression barely changed, but something colder settled behind her smile. She believed every room required a visible reminder of who belonged at the top and who existed only to serve. Without raising her voice, she walked toward Sarah with measured confidence, her heels clicking softly across the marble floor. Sarah immediately greeted her with respectful professionalism, unaware that within the next few minutes, a single decision would quietly reshape every relationship inside the mansion, and that Ethan Caldwell would soon witness a moment none of the guests would ever forget. Sarah lowered her eyes politely and asked whether there was anything else that needed attention before the first guests entered the dining hall. Victoria studied her for a quiet moment before answering with a smile so polished that no outsider would have sensed the calculation behind it. Actually, there is. I noticed fingerprints on the ballroom doors, and I expect everything to be absolutely flawless tonight. Sarah glanced toward the towering glass entrance. The doors had already been cleaned twice that afternoon, but she simply nodded. Of course, Miss Hale. I will take care of them immediately. Victoria thanked her with perfect courtesy before turning back toward a group of arriving socialites, laughing softly as though the conversation had been nothing more than routine household management. Mrs. Whitmore watched from several feet away and quietly sighed. She had worked in luxury homes for more than 30 years and recognized the difference between high standards and unnecessary demands. Still, she also knew Sarah would never argue. Sarah picked up a fresh polishing cloth and walked toward the entrance while servers hurried past carrying silver trays filled with sparkling water and champagne. Every member of the household staff moved with careful efficiency because the evening represented one of the most important social events the Caldwell family had hosted all year. Outside, photographers continued capturing arriving guests while luxury vehicles disappeared one after another down the long private driveway. Inside, conversations about investments, charitable foundations, and upcoming board appointments blended with soft music beneath the crystal chandeliers. Liam remained seated in the quiet service corridor, coloring a picture of a large oak tree beside a tiny house. Mrs. Whitmore stopped beside him carrying a small plate with sliced apples and crackers. "Your mother is almost finished with the busy part of the evening," she said warmly. Liam smiled with genuine gratitude. "She always tells me to be patient because people deserve their special days." Mrs. Whitmore smiled back, touched once again by how much kindness Sarah had managed to teach her son despite the difficulties they quietly carried every day. At nearly the same moment, Ethan Caldwell's vehicle turned through the front gate several minutes earlier than anyone expected. His overseas conference call had ended ahead of schedule, allowing him to return before the formal welcome speech. As his driver opened the car door, Ethan paused for a moment to admire the mansion illuminated against the evening sky. Everything appeared exactly as planned. Elegant. Orderly. Impressive. Yet he could already see employees moving faster than usual through the front windows, their pace revealing the invisible pressure that always accompanied events of this scale. Ethan thanked his driver, straightened his jacket, and entered through a private side entrance rather than the grand staircase reserved for guests. He preferred observing preparations before becoming the center of attention. Meanwhile, Victoria noticed one tiny water ring left beneath a decorative vase near the dining room entrance. The mark was barely visible, something almost every guest would overlook without a second thought. She called Sarah back before the maid had even finished polishing the final glass panel. "Please fix this as well," Victoria said pleasantly. "Perfection is built one small detail at a time." Sarah quietly moved the arrangement, wiped the marble until it reflected the chandelier once again, and replaced every flower exactly where it had been. She offered a respectful nod before returning to her duties, never realizing that while she worked to preserve someone else's perfect evening, her own life was only moments away from changing forever. The first hour of the celebration unfolded exactly as every guest expected. Soft music floated through the mansion while polished conversations filled every corner of the grand ballroom. Investors congratulated Ethan on another successful acquisition, charitable foundation directors discussed upcoming galas, and photographers quietly captured elegant moments that would soon appear in society magazines. Sarah moved from table to table with practiced calm, refilling water glasses before anyone needed to ask, replacing folded napkins that had slipped slightly out of place, and quietly assisting elderly guests who appreciated kindness more than luxury. She never interrupted conversations, never drew attention to herself, and never allowed the pressure surrounding her to affect the warmth of her voice. Those who noticed her remembered only that every request seemed to be fulfilled before it was spoken. Victoria, however, noticed something entirely different. She noticed that several guests thanked Sarah by name after reading the small embroidered tag on her uniform. She noticed Mrs. Whitmore trusting Sarah with responsibilities usually reserved for senior staff. Most of all, she noticed Ethan briefly pausing near the service entrance and offering Sarah a polite nod of appreciation after she quietly directed an elderly couple toward a more comfortable seating area. It was nothing remarkable, only a simple gesture of courtesy, but to Victoria it felt like unnecessary recognition directed toward someone she believed should remain invisible. Her smile never disappeared, yet another idea quietly formed behind it. A few minutes later she approached Sarah while holding an untouched glass of sparkling water. "Sarah, would you be kind enough to bring another floral arrangement from the storage room? The one beside the staircase no longer looks balanced." Sarah glanced toward the arrangement. It appeared perfectly symmetrical, but she answered exactly as she always did. "Certainly, Miss Hale." Before leaving, Sarah walked to the service hallway where Liam still waited patiently. He looked up from his coloring book with a bright smile. "Are you almost done, Mom?" Sarah knelt beside him for a brief moment and gently brushed a loose strand of hair away from his forehead. "Not yet, sweetheart, but I will not be much longer. Stay here with Mrs. Whitmore, and remember what we talked about." Liam nodded immediately. "Do not touch anything that is not mine, and always say thank you." Sarah smiled proudly. "Exactly right." Mrs. Whitmore assured Sarah that she would keep an eye on him while the floral arrangement was retrieved from storage. Reassured, Sarah disappeared down the corridor leading toward the lower level of the mansion. For several quiet minutes everything remained peaceful. Then Mrs. Whitmore received an urgent call from the kitchen informing her that one of the catering deliveries had arrived at the wrong entrance. She hesitated, looking toward Liam. "I need to step outside for just a minute," she explained kindly. "Can you stay right here like the responsible young man I know you are?" Liam nodded with complete confidence. "I will stay exactly here." Mrs. Whitmore smiled and hurried away, believing she would return almost immediately. Liam remained seated at first, carefully adding green leaves to the tree in his drawing. Then his small wooden truck slipped from the chair, rolled gently across the polished hallway, and continued through an open doorway leading toward the grand foyer. Liam quietly stood and followed it, thinking only about retrieving his favorite toy before anyone accidentally stepped on it. He had no idea that with each small step across the marble floor, he was walking toward the single moment that would quietly unravel the perfect image Victoria had spent the entire evening trying to protect. The little wooden truck rolled slowly across the polished marble until it came to rest beside the grand staircase where guests gathered between conversations. Liam hurried after it with the innocent determination only a 4-year-old could possess, carefully picking it up before anyone stepped on it. As he turned to return to the service hallway, he accidentally brushed against a decorative side table. Nothing fell, nothing broke, but a crystal vase shifted just enough for a few drops of water to slide onto the gleaming marble floor beneath it. Liam immediately froze. He stared at the small puddle with wide eyes, remembering every lesson his mother had ever taught him about respecting other people's homes. Before he could think of what to do, Victoria noticed him from across the room. She excused herself from a conversation with several prominent guests and walked toward the child with the same elegant smile she had worn throughout the evening. "Well," she said softly, just loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "someone has created a little problem." Liam lowered his head. "I am sorry. I did not mean to." Victoria looked at the tiny puddle for only a second before glancing toward the surrounding guests. "Accidents happen," she replied pleasantly. "But responsible people clean up after themselves." Her words sounded perfectly reasonable, and several guests nodded without giving the situation much thought. Victoria then looked toward a nearby service cart, picked up a small scrub brush that had been left there by the cleaning staff after polishing the entryway earlier that afternoon, and gently placed it into Liam's small hands. "If you made the mess," she said with calm precision, "then you should clean it yourself. That is how children learn responsibility." Liam looked down at the brush, then back at the floor. His little fingers tightened around the handle as uncertainty filled his face. He had never cleaned marble before. He quietly knelt exactly where Victoria indicated and carefully began rubbing the damp spot with slow, awkward movements, trying with all his heart to do the right thing. Around him, conversations gradually softened. Some guests exchanged uncertain glances but remained silent, assuming Sarah had approved or that another staff member would intervene at any moment. None of them realized Sarah was still in the storage room on the lower level searching for the floral arrangement Victoria had requested. Mrs. Whitmore had not yet returned from the kitchen entrance either. Liam continued moving the small brush back and forth across the marble, his sleeves slipping toward his wrists as he leaned forward with complete concentration. He was not crying. He was not complaining. He simply wanted to fix what he believed was his mistake. Victoria folded her arms and watched quietly, satisfied that the child appeared obedient. She even smiled politely at a nearby guest and remarked that learning accountability early in life was one of the greatest gifts an adult could provide. At that exact moment, the side entrance opened. Ethan Caldwell stepped into the foyer after finishing a brief conversation with his security director outside. He removed his gloves, glanced across the entrance hall, and expected to see guests enjoying another perfect evening. Instead, his eye settled on a tiny boy kneeling alone on the cold marble floor, carefully scrubbing beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers while elegantly dressed adults stood only a few feet away. Ethan stopped walking immediately. The quiet confidence that normally accompanied every step disappeared as he stared at the child, then slowly lifted his eyes toward Victoria. For the first time since arriving home that evening, nothing else inside the mansion seemed to matter. For several long seconds, Ethan did not speak. The conversation surrounding the foyer faded into an uneasy silence as more guests noticed that the host of the evening had stopped moving entirely. His attention never left the little boy. Kneeling on the marble floor, still working carefully with both hands wrapped around the small scrub brush. Liam looked up only briefly, saw a man in a dark suit watching him, then lowered his eyes again, believing he should finish before speaking to anyone. Ethan slowly walked forward, not with anger, but with the quiet focus that had guided every important decision of his career. He stopped a few feet away and looked first at the damp marble, then at the tiny brush, and finally at Victoria. "What is happening here?" he asked calmly. His voice was not loud, yet the question carried through the foyer so clearly that every nearby conversation ended immediately. Victoria answered with the same composed smile she had practiced for years. "Nothing serious. The little boy accidentally spilled water, so I thought it would be a good opportunity to teach him responsibility." Ethan remained silent for another moment before looking back at Liam. The child was still trying to polish the floor exactly as he had been instructed. His sleeves had slipped almost to his elbows, and his small movements revealed determination rather than fear. Ethan knelt until he was almost at the child's eye level. "What is your name, buddy?" Liam stopped scrubbing and answered politely. "My name is Liam, sir." Ethan offered a faint smile. "Did someone tell you to clean the floor?" Liam nodded honestly. "Yes, sir. Miss Victoria said that if I made a mess, I should fix it because good people clean up after themselves." The simplicity of the answer settled heavily over everyone listening. Ethan did not respond immediately. Instead, he noticed something almost no one else had bothered to see. The amount of water on the floor was so small that one paper towel would have removed it in seconds. A professional housekeeper would have handled it without interrupting the evening at all. Yet somehow a 4-year-old child had been handed a scrub brush in the middle of an elegant celebration while dozens of adults quietly watched. Ethan slowly stood and turned toward Victoria. "Where is his mother?" he asked. Victoria answered without hesitation. "She is one of the housekeepers. I sent her to retrieve another floral arrangement." Ethan glanced toward the hallway leading downstairs, mentally calculating the timing. Sarah had been deliberately sent away. Before he could say another word, Mrs. Whitmore hurried back into the foyer carrying a clipboard. The moment she saw Liam on the floor, the color drained from her face. "Liam," she exclaimed softly, immediately walking toward him. "What happened?" Liam looked up with innocent confidence. "I am almost finished, Mrs. Whitmore." She looked from the child to Victoria, then finally toward Ethan, whose expression remained controlled but impossible to read. At that exact moment, Sarah emerged from the lower corridor carrying the fresh floral arrangement Victoria had requested. She smiled automatically as she approached, expecting another ordinary task. Then she saw her son kneeling on the marble floor with a scrub brush in his hands. The arrangement slipped slightly in her grasp as she froze where she stood, her eyes fixed entirely on Liam. Every sound inside the mansion seemed to disappear as mother and son looked at each other across the silent foyer. Sarah carefully set the floral arrangement onto a nearby console table before walking toward Liam with steady steps that revealed neither panic nor anger. She knelt beside him, gently placed one hand on his shoulder, and offered him the same reassuring smile she had given him every day of his life. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" Liam immediately nodded. "Yes, Mom. Miss Victoria said I should clean the floor because I made a little mess." Sarah looked at the marble beneath him. The water had already disappeared. The child had continued scrubbing long after there had been anything left to clean. She quietly took the small brush from his hands and placed it beside her without saying another word. Ethan watched every movement with growing attention. He noticed that Sarah never rushed to defend herself. She never accused anyone. Her first concern had been making certain her son felt safe rather than proving someone else wrong. Victoria maintained her composed expression and stepped forward with quiet confidence. "I hope no one is misunderstanding what happened," she said pleasantly. Children benefit from learning responsibility. Liam caused the problem, and I simply encouraged him to correct it himself. I believe that is a valuable lesson. Several guests exchanged uncertain glances. Her explanation sounded reasonable when separated from the image they had just witnessed. Ethan folded his hands calmly in front of him. "Responsibility is important," he agreed. "Help me understand one thing. Why was a 4-year-old child left to handle this alone in the middle of my foyer while dozens of adults stood nearby?" Victoria answered without hesitation. "Because actions have consequences regardless of age." Ethan looked around the room before asking another question. And why was his mother sent to another part of the mansion at exactly the same time? The silence that followed lasted several long seconds. Victoria offered a polite smile. The floral arrangement genuinely needed attention. Ethan slowly turned toward the arrangement Sarah had just delivered. It looked nearly identical to the one already standing beside the staircase. Mrs. Whitmore quietly lowered her eyes. She had supervised enough events to know the replacement had never been necessary. Ethan noticed her reaction immediately. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said gently, "was the original arrangement acceptable?" The longtime housekeeper hesitated only briefly before answering truthfully. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell. It was already properly positioned." The atmosphere inside the foyer shifted almost imperceptibly. Victoria's smile remained in place, but its confidence had begun to fade. Ethan did not raise his voice. Instead, he turned back toward Liam, whose attention had drifted to his little wooden truck lying a few feet away. "Liam," Ethan asked kindly, "when Miss Victoria gave you the brush, did anyone offer to help you?" The child thought carefully before answering with complete honesty. "No, sir. She said I had to do it by myself because I needed to remember." Ethan remained silent, allowing the simple words to settle over the room. Sarah finally spoke, her voice calm and respectful. "Mr. Caldwell, Liam truly did not intend to cause any inconvenience. If an apology is necessary, I sincerely apologize on behalf of my son." Ethan looked at her with quiet surprise. Even now she was accepting responsibility instead of searching for someone to blame. Before anyone else could speak, Liam gently tugged on Sarah's sleeve and looked up at her with innocent confusion. "Mom," he asked softly, "did I do a good job cleaning like the nice people are supposed to do?" The question lingered in the grand foyer with a weight that no prepared speech, elegant decoration, or expensive celebration could possibly overcome. Sarah carefully placed the floral arrangement on the nearest console table before walking toward Liam with measured steps. Her first instinct was to gather her son into her arms, yet years of working inside other people's homes had taught her to remain composed even when her heart raced. She knelt beside Liam and gently took the small scrub brush from his hands. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "are you all right?" Liam nodded with complete innocence. "Yes, Mom. Miss Victoria said I should clean the water because I made the little spill." Sarah looked down at the marble floor and immediately realized how little water had actually been there. The surface was already spotless. She quietly folded the cleaning cloth beside the brush, then stood without saying another word. Ethan watched every movement. There was no anger in Sarah's face, no accusation, and no attempt to create a scene before the assembled guests. Instead, she placed one reassuring hand on Liam's shoulder and offered him a gentle smile that seemed intended to protect him from embarrassment rather than herself. That quiet dignity caught Ethan's attention more than any dramatic reaction could have. Victoria stepped forward with calm confidence, apparently believing the situation remained entirely under her control. "I hope there is no misunderstanding," she said pleasantly. "Children learn responsibility by correcting their own mistakes. I simply encouraged him to do the right thing." Several guests exchanged uncertain glances. Her explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, yet something about the image of a small child kneeling alone in the middle of an elegant foyer refused to sit comfortably in anyone's mind. Ethan folded his hands behind his back and asked only one question. How many adults were standing here while a 4-year-old cleaned the floor? The silence that followed felt heavier than any raised voice. No one answered immediately. Victoria maintained her smile. Everyone understood the lesson I was trying to teach. Ethan slowly turned toward the nearby staff members. Did anyone offer him a towel? Did anyone help him? Mrs. Whitmore lowered her eyes with visible regret. I had stepped away for a delivery, sir. When I returned, this had already happened. Ethan nodded once before looking toward Sarah. Did you know your son was here? Sarah answered honestly. No, sir. I believed he was still waiting with Mrs. Whitmore while I retrieved the flowers. Ethan's gaze shifted back to Victoria. So his mother was intentionally occupied elsewhere when this decision was made. Victoria's polished expression tightened almost imperceptibly. I needed the flowers replaced. It was an ordinary request. Ethan did not challenge her directly. Instead, he looked down at Liam again. Can you tell me exactly what happened? Liam hugged his little wooden truck against his chest and answered with the complete honesty only a child could offer. My truck rolled away. I picked it up, and the vase moved a tiny bit. I said I was sorry. Miss Victoria gave me the brush because she said children who make messes should clean big houses too. A quiet murmur spread through the gathered guests. Liam continued without realizing the effect of his words. I wanted to finish fast because Mom works really hard, and I did not want anyone to think she was bad at her job. Sarah closed her eyes for the briefest moment, holding back emotion before smiling gently at her son. Ethan remained perfectly still, but something behind his calm expression had unmistakably changed. For the first time that evening, he was no longer evaluating an unfortunate misunderstanding. He was beginning to question the character of the woman he had planned to marry. No one interrupted the silence that followed. The string quartet continued playing somewhere deeper. Inside the mansion, yet the gentle melody now felt strangely distant, as though the entire evening had quietly narrowed to the people standing in the foyer. Ethan looked at Liam for another long moment before speaking again. You were worried someone would think your mother was not doing her job. Liam nodded immediately. Mom always tells me that people trust her because she works hard. I did not want anyone to stop trusting her because of me. Ethan slowly exhaled. There was no rehearsed innocence in the child's voice, only sincere concern for his mother. Victoria stepped forward with measured confidence, determined to restore control before the uncomfortable silence spread any further. Children often exaggerate situations without meaning to, she said pleasantly. He simply wanted to help after making a mistake. I encouraged responsibility, nothing more. Ethan turned toward her without changing his calm expression. Responsibility is important, he agreed. Humiliation is something entirely different. Victoria's smile faltered for the briefest instant. Surely you are not suggesting that asking a child to clean up after himself is humiliating. Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked around at the elegantly dressed guests surrounding them. If accountability was the lesson, he asked quietly, why was it taught in front of an audience? No one spoke. Several guests lowered their eyes, suddenly aware that they had remained silent while a little boy worked alone on the polished marble floor. Liam gently tugged on Sarah's hand, unaware of the growing tension between the adults. Mom, he whispered softly, did I do something wrong? Sarah immediately knelt beside him once again and placed both hands gently on his shoulders. No, sweetheart. You told the truth, and telling the truth is never wrong when it is done kindly. Liam looked relieved, then glanced toward Ethan with innocent curiosity. Sir, I really did not want anyone to be upset. I just wanted the floor to be clean before Mom came back. Ethan felt something shift inside him. Throughout his career he had met executives who could deliver flawless presentations and politicians who could carefully shape every sentence. Yet this small child had expressed more honesty in a few simple words than many adults managed in an entire lifetime. Victoria attempted one final explanation. You are allowing emotion to cloud an ordinary situation. Every successful family teaches discipline. Before Ethan could respond, Liam quietly spoke again, not realizing anyone had asked him to remain silent. Miss Victoria says Mom has to clean things again, sometimes even when they are already clean. Sarah gently squeezed his shoulder, hoping to stop him before he unknowingly made the situation worse, but Liam continued with complete sincerity. She says people like us have to work extra hard because rich people expect more. A quiet murmur spread through the gathered guests. Mrs. Whitmore slowly closed her eyes, recognizing words she had silently suspected but had never personally witnessed. Sarah lowered her head for a moment, then looked directly at Ethan. "Sir, my son is only repeating what he has seen. I have never encouraged him to judge anyone. I only ask that he grows into a kind and respectful person." Ethan studied Sarah carefully. She had not denied the child's words. She had not accused Victoria of cruelty. She had not asked for sympathy or attempted to defend herself. Instead, her greatest concern remained protecting her son's character. That realization settled more deeply in Ethan than any accusation ever could, and for the first time since the engagement had been announced, he found himself wondering whether he had truly known the woman standing beside him at all. The atmosphere inside the foyer changed in a way that no carefully arranged celebration could repair. Guests who had arrived expecting an evening of elegant speeches and quiet congratulations now found themselves watching something far more revealing than any formal ceremony. Ethan remained composed, but those who had worked beside him for years recognized the expression on his face. It was the same calm focus he wore whenever he discovered that an important assumption had been wrong. He turned toward Sarah, speaking with the same measured tone he used during business negotiations. "Mrs. Miller, I would like to ask you something, and I hope you will answer honestly. Has anything like this happened before?" Sarah hesitated, not because she feared the truth, but because she understood the consequences of speaking inside someone else's home. She glanced at Liam, who looked back at her with complete trust, then quietly answered. "Sir, my responsibility has always been to care for this house while respecting everyone in it. I have tried very hard to keep my personal difficulties separate from my work." Ethan nodded gently. "That was not my question." Sarah lowered her eyes for a brief moment before meeting his gaze again. "There have been occasions when I was asked to repeat tasks that were already completed. There have been moments when I felt that nothing I did was ever enough. I accepted those moments because I believed providing stability for my son was more important than protecting my pride." The honesty in her voice carried no resentment. She was describing facts rather than seeking sympathy, and that quiet restraint made every word feel more powerful. Victoria stepped forward immediately. "That is an unfair interpretation. I simply expect excellence from everyone working in this house." Sarah responded before Ethan could speak. "There is nothing wrong with expecting excellence, Miss Hale. I have never objected to working hard." She paused briefly, then continued with gentle sincerity. "What I hoped was that my son would never confuse hard work with believing he deserved less kindness than anyone else." Several guests slowly exchanged thoughtful glances. An older couple standing near the grand staircase nodded almost imperceptibly, as though recognizing a truth that extended far beyond the mansion itself. Liam looked up at his mother and quietly slipped his small hand into hers. "Mom," he asked innocently, "did I make your work harder today?" Sarah smiled with unmistakable warmth and gently brushed the hair away from his forehead. "No, sweetheart. You reminded me why I work so hard every single day." Ethan watched the exchange without interrupting. Nothing about it appeared rehearsed. There was no attempt to impress anyone. It was simply the natural conversation between a mother and her child. He realized that throughout the entire evening Sarah had never defended herself first. Every decision she made had been centered on protecting Liam's sense of dignity. Victoria noticed Ethan's silence and tried once more to recover the evening. "We cannot allow one emotional misunderstanding to overshadow months of planning and celebration." Ethan slowly turned toward her. "This is no longer about planning." His voice remained calm, but every word settled heavily across the silent foyer. "A celebration reveals what people choose to honor. Tonight has revealed something I cannot ignore. He bent down, picked up the small scrub brush that still rested on the polished marble floor, and held it thoughtfully in his hand for a moment before placing it quietly on the nearby service cart. No dramatic gesture accompanied the movement, yet everyone watching understood its meaning. The lesson that had begun with a child on his knees was no longer about a few drops of water. It had become a question of character, and Ethan knew the answer was beginning to change everything he believed about the future he had been preparing to build. No one attempted to restart the music or return to casual conversation. The magnificent foyer remained as beautiful as it had been an hour earlier, yet every polished surface now reflected a different kind of truth. Ethan stood quietly for several moments before looking directly at Sarah. "Mrs. Miller," he said respectfully, "thank you for answering my questions with honesty." Sarah gave a small nod. "I only answered what you asked, sir." Ethan looked down at Liam, who was still holding his little wooden truck. "And thank you, Liam." The little boy blinked with surprise. "For what?" Ethan smiled gently. "For reminding every adult in this room that doing the right thing is sometimes much simpler than we make it." Liam smiled back with innocent relief, never realizing how deeply his words had affected everyone around him. Ethan then turned toward the assembled guests. His voice remained calm, but every sentence carried quiet certainty. "All of us have spent this evening celebrating success, achievement, and reputation. Those things matter. I have devoted my life to building them. But tonight I was reminded that none of them have lasting value if they are separated from kindness." Several guests lowered their eyes while others nodded almost imperceptibly. No one argued. Ethan continued, "A child should never feel responsible for protecting an adult's dignity by sacrificing his own. And no employee should believe that keeping a job requires accepting less respect than anyone else in this house." Victoria finally stepped forward, her confidence no longer as effortless as it had been throughout the evening. "Ethan, surely this conversation belongs in private." He looked at her with neither anger nor hostility. "Perhaps. But the lesson itself became public the moment a little boy was asked to kneel on this floor while dozens of people watched. His words were never spoken as an accusation, yet they settled over the room with unmistakable weight." Victoria remained silent. For the first time all evening, she seemed unable to find an explanation polished enough to restore the image she had carefully maintained. Ethan walked toward Sarah and Liam. "Mrs. Miller, your shift is finished for tonight." Sarah looked surprised. "Sir, there is still work to do." Ethan shook his head gently. "There will always be more work. There will not always be another chance to correct what should never have happened." He then looked toward Mrs. Whitmore. "Please arrange transportation home for Sarah and Liam, and make sure they are paid for the entire evening." Mrs. Whitmore smiled with visible relief. "Of course, sir." Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a simple business card before handing it to Sarah. "Tomorrow, if you are willing, I would like to meet with you. Not as an employer speaking to an employee, but as one person speaking to another. There are opportunities within the Caldwell Foundation that value integrity as much as experience, and I believe you deserve to hear about them." Sarah accepted the card carefully, her expression calm as always. "Thank you, sir. Whatever tomorrow brings, I appreciate your fairness today." Ethan nodded. "Respectfully." As Sarah took Liam's hand and quietly walked toward the front entrance beside Mrs. Whitmore, the little boy turned around one last time and waved with the same bright smile he had worn all evening. Ethan returned the wave. Only after the doors closed behind them did he slowly look around the silent foyer. The celebration had not ended the way anyone expected, yet he realized the most valuable lesson of the evening had not been found beneath crystal chandeliers or expensive decorations. It had come from a hard-working mother who never abandoned her dignity, and from a little boy whose honest heart reminded an entire room that character is measured not by wealth or status, but by how we choose to treat people when no one believes they matter.